Great to see everyone this morning. This cloudy morning, I'm starting to wonder if we're in the Pacific Northwest, the type of week that we've been having, right? What happened to sunny Florida? This is still the happiest place on earth. So, thanks everyone for coming. I do have a few housekeeping items before we get the program started. For one, please, I know we all have very important things going on outside of here and phone calls happen, but if you can please put your cell phones on vibrate, that would be appreciated. Also, bathrooms, they are to the left here through these glass doors. Mary Beth just came through with some hot coffee, but there's restrooms just through those doors. So if you have to go, that's where you go. Also, today's event is being streamed live and is live captioned. And to view the live captioning, please go to floridabusiness.org in the Media Center and look for closed captioning. So, because we anticipate there's going to be a lot of questions for our featured speaker, there are question cards at each table. Please fill them out and staff will come and read off your questions. And we want to make sure that we get everyone's questions accounted for and that our speaker can answer them responsibly. And so in order to make that happen, we kind of need to coordinate that through the question card. So if we can all do that, that would be appreciated. At this time, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and I'd like to take a moment as well to recognize some of our guests in the room, our elected officials. So I will start with Mr. Matt Reinhardt, Volusia County Council member. Richard Bryan, Daytona Beach Shores Commissioner. My neighbor, Nancy Miller, Daytona Beach Shores Mayor. Lisa Stafford, Orange City Council member. Alex Tiamson, Orange City Council member. Don Burnett, Port Orange Mayor. And Ernie Andino, District Director for Congressman Michael Waltz. Now I want to thank our sponsor, Mr. Jason Meyer, founder and CEO of Synergy Billing. He has a few words he'd like to share with us this morning. Come on up, Jason.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Meyer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Synergy Billing. I also wear two hats today because I'm also the founder of the Fountainhead campus in Holly Hill, Florida. Got some things to share with you briefly this morning, but before I do, I'd like to introduce a few guests that are joining us today, some of them from out of town. And joining us at our table this morning is first my dad, Mike Meyer, who's our Chief Financial Officer within our company. Dad. Jeanette Durer, who's Executive Vice President at Synergy Billing. Also joined by Bobby Runyon, who's the Executive Regional Director for Bold Age PACE, a partner that we're announcing here today that's joining us at the Fountainhead campus. And she is accompanied by the Senior Medical Director of Bold Age PACE, Dr. Glenn Myers. Just wave your hands real quick. And also pleased to welcome to our table Joe Giacomo, as well as Jeff Bowman, Executive Leadership at AZA Health. So welcome. So many of you have visited us at the Fountainhead campus, which is located at 1200 Synergy Way in Holly Hill, Florida. This has been a long-time vision of mine, and my company, Synergy Billing, is the anchor tenant. But there's also a few other things going on at the Fountainhead campus, and sometimes it takes a little while for reality to catch up to a vision. but we're finally getting there. And so we're really pleased to announce that Bold Age Pace is making their Volusia County headquarters right at the Fountainhead campus. And they will be making services available to low-income seniors, and they'll be occupying just over 25,000 square feet of space at the Fountainhead campus. For those of you that don't know, the Fountainhead campus is a mixed-use project. It's both home to Synergy Billing, as well as some other innovative companies. My company, Meyer Corp., WorkSmart MD, which is a technology company, and something we call the Fountainhead Idea Factory. We've always had plans to make community health available right there within the Fountainhead campus, and bringing Bold Age Pace into the project is one of those components, as well as I'd like to say that we're dating with Asa Health. We've talked about them forming a location expansion within the Fountainhead campus, although we're not ready to officially announce that yet, but clearly they're sitting at the table here, so we're very close to our discussions. So pleased to make this announcement today. Presently, it's a 23-acre mixed-use development, home to Synergy Billing, WorkSmart MD, and many of you may know Jim Cameron Consulting also leases some space there as well. Presently, we have just over 29,000 square feet of space, which, for those that don't know, this project used to be located where the Holly Hill Middle School was. Many of you may have attended Holly Hill Middle School. So the city purchased that land from Volusia County Schools, and I acquired it from the city in 2017, and we've both been redeveloping and building some new construction. So in the not-too-distant future, we'll be adding 60,000 square feet of new construction and a futuristic building that is going to give a facelift to that community in Holly Hill. And we'll also be adding a few other tenants, one called the Synergy Career Academy, which is a nonprofit vocational school for the trades that will exist at the Fountainhead campus. A quick preview of what we'll be building right off of Center Avenue and LPGA in Holly Hill. But I think that's going to make Holly Hill look more like Hollywood. So things always take twice as long and cost twice as much as you think. That's just the nature of the beast. In fact, one of my mentors, his name was Randolph Tucker, and I call it Randolph's Rule of 2.5. Multiply everything by 2. And that's pretty much what it's going to take. So we've been working backwards, and that's been the same thing with this timeline here. Although we're doing a two-part welcome to Bold Age Pace. We hope to make services available middle of next year, part of phase 1. And then there'll be a second phase when the new construction opens up, and we'll be able to expand even more. So excited to be here sponsoring today to inform you all that the Fountainhead campus is much more than just Synergy Billing and much bigger for our community than just a place of employment, but also a place to get healthy in East Volusia. So thank you all for being here today. It's great to see so many faces that I know.
Thank you so much, Jason. All right, so let's get into the presentation. So November is National Entrepreneur Month, and so we thought it would be prudent for us to highlight and celebrate some of the innovators here in Volusia County. So small businesses accounted for 62.7% of job creation since 1995, and also 43% of the national gross domestic product. The thing that I noticed about the pie chart is millennials aren't as lazy as we thought. They make up 12% of some of the entrepreneurial businesses. Of course, Generation X, 46%, and then the baby boomers are at 39%. Looking at some of the businesses that were formed in the county, 10,300 new businesses were registered with the IRS in 2022, and that's a 52% increase from pre-pandemic levels. It's estimated 3,500 of those are high propensity applications, which is a high likelihood that these businesses have payroll. So that's also a 25% increase from 2019. Looking at growth occurring with the number of business establishments in Volusia County, we are keeping in line with that growth rate with the state of Florida. 14% increase from 2018 through 2022, compared with the state of Florida with a 24% increase. And our businesses in our Volusia County incubator, 887 positions have been created since 2011, and of those, software as a service is contributing to the lion's share of that portion. Professional services follow up with 241. Looking at some of our commercial new construction building permits, for the third quarter, it's approximately $75 million in new ground-up construction. The last 4 quarters averaged 45 permits for a total of $490 million. So included in that number, of course, we have the Costco that is going across the street here in One Daytona, and also a variety of storage facilities accounting for $38 million. And then multifamily apartments account for $24.8 million of those commercial construction permits. Residential construction's doing a little better. We had 996 permits for the year so far, or for the third quarter so far. Most recent 4 quarters is 3,500, the value of $1.3 billion. So looking at that for the same time frame, it was $1.3 billion with 4,239 permits. So I'm going to go back and look at Ms. Van Ecker's favorite slide back when she was in this role, looking at where we are in relation to where we were in the pandemic. Of course, the unemployment rate is still at a healthy 3.4%. Available labor force and employed labor force are still at the highest levels, indicating that people are moving into the community. And I think this is a perfect segue for us to bring up our speaker to give you a little bit more detailed outlook on what the labor market looks like, as well as where we are with the economy. So I am going to bring up Dr. Jerry Parrish here, but first, let me give you a little bit of background about our speaker. Dr. Parrish is the chief economist at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. He was previously the director of state and local policy analysis at Florida Institute of Government at Florida State University. He's an adjunct professor and Master's of Applied Economics program at Florida State as well. He was previously the chief economist and director of research at the Florida Chamber Foundation. Before that, he was the chief economist and director of Center of Competitive Florida at Florida Tax Watch. Prior to that, he served as the associate director of the Center of Economic Forecasting and Analysis at Florida State University. He has many, many years of experience in the private sector and management roles in international manufacturing companies. So with that, let me bring up Dr. Jerry Parrish.
Thank you. Well, thanks. I know I should probably stand here at the podium because of the live feed that you guys are doing, so I'll do that. Anyway, glad to be here. It's been a while since I've been down to this part of the country. Was glad to see some rain finally moving in, maybe a little too much for some of you guys, but anyway, glad to be back in Florida today. I've been up in the Metro Atlanta Chamber since August the 1st full-time, but I will tell you that I'm still in Tallahassee most weekends. I get the chance to go back down there. It's been fun. All you Knowles fans know what I'm talking about. It's been a lot better year than what we've seen in quite a while, and just exciting to be in the hunt for a college football playoff championship. It's pretty special. Compared the mood in Tallahassee compared to what it was a couple of years ago, I will tell you, is vastly different. All right, let's talk about the economy here. I don't mind you guys interrupting me with questions along the way. If it's something I'm going to talk about, I'll say, wait, hang on a few slides here, and I'll talk about that. But feel free to interrupt me if you want to. That'll be fine with me if there's something you want to talk about. Well, let's talk about overall. Let's see how Florida's been doing compared to the U.S. And let's see how this region's been doing compared to Florida and the U.S. Everybody wants to see, are we doing better, are we doing worse? And it's very interesting what's going on down here. A lot of efforts in economic development certainly have paid off down here. Now I want to remind you a couple things. We've got two different areas we can talk about because we get data on two different things. One is the county, Volusia County. I'll talk a lot about that. But remember also, you guys are part of a metropolitan statistical area. And that's the two-county Flagler, Volusia. So when I say MSA, I'm talking about the two-county region. Volusia, of course, is just this one. But let's talk about how the state's done since COVID is of particular interest. Normally, when I would do these speeches, I'd say, oh, let's look at just year over year. But what you have to think about is, we had a big downturn during COVID and then recovery. If we only look at the past 12 months of recovery, we might overlook some good things that have happened because maybe we had a really good run right after COVID and had great growth, and then it kind of tapered off a little bit. So I'm going to kind of concentrate on that, versus February 2020 will be a lot of the data because I think that's the right thing to do right now. In another year or so, we'll kind of go back to the year-over-year looks, but I think it's too early. But let's look at Florida. Florida's jobs, how they've recovered we recovered as a state. Who wants to guess that Florida did better than the U.S.? Raise your hand over that period of time. Shouldn't surprise anyone, we certainly have here. Here's the non-farm job series, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a farm boy. I'm not discriminating against farm jobs. It's just they're very seasonal. And so when we want to take out the seasonality, which this series does, we just typically use that non-farm jobs, and it includes government jobs, but it excludes those self-employed jobs here. But you can see we've hit over 9.5 million jobs now. We've got 728,800 more jobs now than we did in February 2020. That's an 8.0% increase. Anybody want to guess what the U.S. increase was during that time? 3. So that's massive. That is a ton of jobs being created here in the state of Florida. It took us 18 months to kind of get back to where we were February 2020. That's a lot quicker. It's about 7 months quicker than the U.S. average for that metric. So let's think about the MSA, the two-county area. You guys, Flagler County as well. Did you do better than the U.S.? Did you do worse than the U.S.? Did you do better than Florida? Who thinks you did better than the U.S. here in job creation? Everybody agree with that. But look at Florida here, 8.0%. How many people think the MSA did better than Florida, which was one of the top states in the entire country? I see one hand, 2. 2 of you are right. 8.8%. That is massive. What does that tell me? That's a lot of effort in economic development. That's certainly making your community attractive for people to move down here, create jobs. We've had great job creation. I like that slide that you got to see there. And yes, small businesses create basically on any given year about 60% of all net new jobs that are being created here. So, entrepreneurship, stuff that you guys are doing, that helps. It all helps. But, that's pretty amazing for an MSA. That's a pretty amazing trick. So I would congratulate yourselves on that. Almost at the state average during that 2013 to 2022 period, but since the COVID recovery, higher certainly than even Florida. Now let's kind of look at the breakdown of where the jobs are, and I use this series called the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages when I do this, and I show Volusia County versus Florida versus the U.S. Here's your percentage of private sector jobs that are in these categories, and you may not be able to see the numbers in the back. I'm going to call out a couple. I will tell you I sent Heather these slides. Heather, if you want to send these slides out to anybody that requests them, that would be great. Turn them into a PDF if you don't mind before you do it. I have had people change my slides, and Don't necessarily like that. So anyway, what you can see here is one of the key things, manufacturing 7.1% versus Florida's 4.9. You know, manufacturing, you know, I'm still on the board of Florida Makes. That is the, it's kind of like the extension service. You know, you've got county agents for agriculture. We're the agents for, you know, increasing manufacturing and make it more competitive here in the state of Florida. And so I'll look at those numbers, and I'm going to show you where the wages, you know, I'll give you a percentage of jobs versus a percentage of wages here in a minute. So that's a good deal. That's very strong. A little lower on financial activities, professional business services. You're close to the average between Florida and the U.S. The higher number, not going to be a surprise to a lot of you. Leisure and hospitality is almost 18% of the jobs here, you know, even higher than Florida on the average. What's been good about that is the recovery. You know, you've heard the term revenge travel. People are out there traveling. So being higher on leisure and hospitality is not such a bad thing these days. You know, it's created a lot of jobs, created a lot of income. But here's the slide that shows you those same numbers in Florida, but the percent of wages. And you can see that leisure and hospitality is about 9.8% versus almost 18% of the jobs. And here's the average annual wages. They'll track exactly. Average manufacturing job here is $63,483. This is the end of 2022. It's the annual average here. So those have been going up. So a lot of strong opportunities here. Financial activities, professional business services, you know, is punching above their weight. Higher percentage of wages versus, you know, percentage of jobs. So, you know, you've got a good economy down here. You've been able to take advantage of a lot of what's happening since COVID has happened. Now, I want to talk about a recession because people are always asking me about this. So I want to ask this, hold up your hand. Do you think we're currently in a recession in America right now? Anybody believe that? Some people do, so I'm going to guess the others of you think that we're not, or you don't know. Well, I don't know. So I'm not going to say if you're right or wrong. Who knows? There's a committee of 8 people. It's called the Business Cycle Dating Committee. They date the business cycle when recessions start and end. There's 8 people. They work for the National Bureau of Economic Research, and we're not in a recession until they say we're in one. So they haven't come out and said that we're in a recession, so we must not be, correct? Not necessarily, because they typically wait until 8 or 9 months after the recession started and say, hey, 8 or 9 months ago, you were started in a recession. It's a little easier when you're coming out of one, so it only takes about 6 months after the recession ends for them to say you're not in a recession. But there's been so much talk out there, so much uncertainty. That's been the order of the day, is the uncertainty. And you may remember last year we had a bunch of news articles that says, oh my God, the Q1 and Q2 GDP numbers for the U.S. were down. They were both negative. That means we're in a recession. And I'd say, no, it does not, because what do those 8 people say? They haven't said we're in a recession. GDP was down, but look how strong the labor market was. It was crazy. And that's what's kept us out of a recession. But why are people keeping to predict a recession? I'm going to give you I'm going to treat you like my econ students, my master's and applied economics students. I love those kids at FSU. I've been teaching up there for 12 years. I actually started the year, I'm a double Auburn grad, you know. So I went as an undergrad, agriculture, business, and economics. Went back to get a PhD when I was 33 years old. Graduated when I was 38. So I spent 9 years of my life at Auburn. My first year teaching at FSU was when Auburn and FSU were in the National Football Championship together. So one of my colleagues come to me and they say, Jerry, who are you pulling for? And oh, by the way, we give you a paycheck every month. So anybody want to guess what I said? War Eagle. So anyway, I've had my grad students do a lot. I did a forecasting model for us being in a recession that went up on the website of where I used to work for. Every month I would establish a probability. And one of the things you look at is what is the bond market telling you about the probabilities of recession. So I'm going to explain what's been going on. We've had this yield curve inversion. You guys probably heard that on the news. I'm going to explain in simple terms what that means. And we saw it in the headlines. First of all, I forgot to show this slide. Let me tell you about the population change. You're continuing to grow almost at the state rate, 17.1%. You've gained 84,752 people since 2010 here in the official numbers, and so that's good. Good, healthy growth still, and that's who's taking those. That's who's filling up the restaurant. You're trying to get reservations for that, and the visitors that are coming in here. But anyway, back to the bond market here. We saw this. Bonds flash the recession warning. It's like, oh my God, we're going to have a recession because the bond market says we're going to. Not those 8 people at NBER, the bond market says. This is in July of 2022. So how many months? That's 16 months ago. There was a signal at a recession. So what all the economists do, wait, this has been a reliable predictor of a recession for a long, long time, so we must be going into recession. What are they talking about? Short-term yields, and they typically look at government treasuries. You know, 3-year notes, 6-month notes, 1-year notes. The ones I like to look at is the 2-year versus the 10-year. Now, normally, a longer-term note would carry a higher interest rate, right? If a bank's going to loan you money over a longer period of time, there needs to be, it's more risky, right? So they should get a higher interest rate. But what happens is you end up with this situation. The blue line here is, and this is for you UF guys, yeah, this is your colors here, almost. So anyway, the normal line is blue. You know, the longer you go out in duration, the higher the interest rate. But a yield curve inversion means the shorter term rates are higher. And this is someone who doesn't understand the bond market's representation of an inversion. Because what the inversion actually looks like, and I had to send in my slides on the 12th, so I did it on the 12th, this is what the yield curve actually looks like now. You know, a 1-year or 2-year rate, over 5%. That's pretty high. And you can see the short duration are higher than the long ones down here. Now this is not a huge spread. The inversion here is 41 basis points. You know, 0.4%. But what that means is that signal has been persistent for a long time. It's been in the 90 and 100 basis points up until here recently. So the yield curve is getting a little less inverted, but it's been inverted for a long time. Now, why is that important? It's because every time we've had this recently, and I'll show you the Federal Reserve chart here. When you see a Federal Reserve chart like this, the gray bars indicate a recession. So every time the yield curve has inverted, which means it goes below zero, you take the 10-year minus the 2-year, every time it has preceded a recession. So everybody says it's inverted for the last 16 months. That means we're going to have a recession. Typically, you know, monetary policy takes about 12 to 18 months to feed through the economy. Where are we now? We're at 16 months. So are we going to be in a recession or not? Hey, nobody knows. You know, what are those 8 people thinking up there in D.C. at the NBER? We don't know that. However, I will tell you, I've been saying for the last 16 months, the labor market is far too strong for us to be declared in a recession. That's my own personal opinion. I'm not one of those 8 people up there. So that's why everybody's been thinking it. And then you hear this term soft landing. You know, we're gonna be in a soft landing, and hey, you look at the news the last month or so, it looks more and more like, hey, we may whip inflation, job market's still strong, we might just pull this thing out, right? So who knows what's gonna happen? We don't know. If economist tells you they know for sure and they're not rich, do not believe them. All right, what's the big deal about all this stuff? Well, what you've got is the Federal Reserve pushing up short-term rates, right? They can't control the long end of the curve, the 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. The market controls that. So that's where you see this fight. You know, that's why the short-term rates are super high. They keep, raising. Now they've paused, but they have raised the short-term interest rates by more than 5%. You know, that's a lot. 500 basis points in the short period of time, that's a lot. And you see, you know, some of the things going on out there. What does it really mean, and what do people care about? Well, people care about what it costs to buy a house. And I'm going to tell you, here's these 30-year mortgage rates. And everybody says, we have a financial advisor at the Metro Atlanta Chamber to come in, and he told me, he said, well, these interest rates are unprecedented. Guess how old he is? If you're my age, you know people that paid 12, 14, 16, 18% for 30-year mortgages back in the 70s. And this slide's a little bit of my lead-in to what's going to happen, you know, to the future of interest rates, because it's super important. What happens? Costs more to borrow money. Are businesses more or less likely to invest? Less. You know, deals that penciled in at 3% do not pencil in at 7.5%, 8%. They just don't make it, do they? So we know there's likely to be less business investment. Private sector investment is what creates jobs in this state and in this country. So people are squealing because interest rates now, they actually come down a little bit off the 8 number. You know, they're in the low 7s right now. Well, if you're my age, it's like, it's kind of average. You know, we're back to normal. I've heard a lot of people say that. There's no normal, by the way. But a lot of people are thinking that. But man, here's what's happening, and here's why it's important to the business community here. All right, interest rates are 7.5%. You get offered a new job. What are you going to do? It's like, wait, I've locked in a 2.75% interest rate on my mortgage. If I have to sell this house and pay as much money or more for a house, now I've got to go borrow money at what? So the mobility in the labor market has become a big, big issue. If you're young, you're out of college, it's like you probably don't have enough experience to take some of those really high-paying jobs, but you're willing to move. So we see that happening, but people are not willing to give up their house. And one of the things I like to, point out is, I think the last National Home Builders Report says, wow, 75% of all the houses that sold last month were brand new houses. It's like, how can that happen? It's like, because nobody that's got a used house is willing to move. They're not selling them. That's all you got. And is it helping our supply? Are we bringing on housing fast enough to cover the supply of all these people moving down here? No, we're not. And so housing prices are continuing to go up, mortgage rates continuing to go up. That's the situation we're in. It not only affects business, it affects, the state of Florida and the federal government. I'll talk about them in a minute. What's the state of Florida? Excuse me, let me get my water. What's happening to the state of Florida and our finances? It's like, hey, we got a surplus. We got some debt. How much is it? Here it is, in billions of dollars. We won't get the 2023 numbers until a little bit later. But look at that. Florida's been paying down its debt. Is that a big deal when you've got a $100+ billion state budget? No, because that day there's a guy named Ben Watkins who refinanced all the bonds in Florida when they hit the lowest points ever. And he's up there in Tallahassee. I've gotten to know Ben. He's a super nice guy. It would be stupid for us to pay off our debt at such low interest rates. Hey, you can go online and get 5% on a kind of passbook savings account now. So if you got debt at 2 or 3%, doesn't make financial sense to pay that off. But you can see Florida's been responsible. We've got a constitutional amendment that says, hey, we have to pay our bills. We have to have a balanced budget. So we do every year. So the state of Florida is in really good shape. How about consumers? This is the interesting part. Interest rates are going up, doesn't matter what you're borrowing money for right now. This is the total debt balance, and the blue area is housing debt. Anybody surprised it really kind of took a spike over the last 2 or 3 years? No, because housing prices went way up. What about the red? The red's non-housing. What does that mean? Credit cards, student loans, those kind of things. Look at the gap is getting wider. The gap between the red and the blue. I'll show you some numbers here in a second. Here's the big deal. interest rates going up, who does it affect, and how much does it affect them? And let me give you the punchline here. It affects different people in different ways. Here is consumer debt. There's mortgage debt on the left, 13.77. This is $1 trillion. Well, you know, compared to the value of housing stock, it's not that much. You know, it's reasonable, especially if you've got a 2.75, 3.5, 4% mortgage. It's pretty reasonable, right? Now, the people that have just borrowed that and paid a whole lot of money for their houses this past year, are they going to be okay? Depends. Can they keep their job? Everything runs good in the labor market right now, so probably. Auto debt, $1.5 trillion. Credit card is a different story. Broke $1 trillion. That's a lot. Why is it a lot? Because we added $150 billion to that number in the last 12 months at those crazy high interest rates. Why? Some people's, their income hadn't kept up. They're living on credit cards and not paying them off. That's $150 billion. That is your signal right there that, oh my God, some people are going to be in trouble as interest rates continue to climb. Student loans, $1.76 trillion. Is that a big deal? Well, if you invested wisely and got a good education at a good school, probably not. It's an investment in yourself. You know, if you got a degree that's not marketable, if you decide that, you don't want to work, all these kind of things can make that either good or bad, depending on what you are. But typically, that's an investment in yourself. The signal here is the credit card debt and the growth of credit card debt over the past, year especially. And you know what happened? Gas prices went up, food prices went up, rent went up, everything went up since COVID, and that's a big, big part of it here. What's happened to credit card charge-off rates? Anybody think they're at all-time highs now that, interest rates have gone up? Balances are shooting up like crazy. The banks charge these things off when they figure out their bad debts, and they just charge them off on their books. And who believes that they're at all-time highs right now? Great response. You're just wrong. It is going up. You can see the dip there. Here's what happened when we got, stimulus checks. People were responsible in a lot of cases and paid down their credit card debt. And so you see that dip after 2020. Here is the recession in 2020, the 3-month recession. And so stimulus checks roll in, people are responsible, they pay off their credit card debts. Back up to, looks like kind of a long-term average there, nothing near as bad as it was during the Great Recession. If you remember that, a lot of defaults on that stuff. All right. Where's the big problem besides credit card debt? Where's the biggest problem that interest rates are going up? Try this one. Federal government. Federal government, and I blame you. And you may say, that's pretty arrogant. Why am I blaming you guys in this room? I blame all of us. Because here's what's happening. Congress is just, I'm glad they, didn't shut down the government. That's totally irresponsible. This is irresponsible enough. Shutting down the government would have been irresponsible on top of that. But here's what's going on up there. And, the good thing is, I don't work for a, congressional candidate or, any kind of politician. I get to say pretty much what I want to, and I always do. This is a big deal. Now, a year ago, I would have said about 90% of our federal debt is financed at long-term low interest rates. But that percentage is going down. How much is it going down? Well, a lot of recent debt is causing this. U.S. debt, we're paying at an annualized rate of $1 trillion a year. It's $1 trillion we can't spend on education, health care, those kind of things that you want your government to pay for. There's $1 trillion less of it happening, coming up here. Why is it happening? That's because we don't penalize people that let this happen. With the political process, nobody's standing up and saying, or at least they're not winning, by saying that we're going to balance the federal budget. And so this is a big deal. Why? It crowds out private investment. It crowds out spending, that has positive returns for the economy. And so that's a big deal. So interest rates are up. Are they going to go down? Hey, the Federal Reserve paused. They paused. They didn't raise this last time. And I got the chance to interview Raphael Bostic about 5 or 6 weeks ago. He's the president of the Atlanta Federal Reserve. Super nice guy. Interesting fact, to get this job at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, Dr. Bostic was the previous chair. I had to be interviewed by the president of the Atlanta Fed to get the job that I have now, which was super cool. He's a super nice guy. But I got to interview him in front of a bunch of people, and his take was, hey, let's just keep interest rates where we are and see how it affects the economy. And I think that's the reasonable thing to do. Because you move up, you move down. If you move too much, if you let it loose too early, then you just add more uncertainty into the market. So what's going to happen to interest rates from here? Does anybody think the Federal Reserve is going to raise short-term interest rates, in the near future? A few. Anybody expect them to lower in the near future? Oh, you're probably right about that. They'll let it ride for a little while. But you got to remember that the Federal Reserve is not the only people in the market affecting especially the long-term interest rate. It's the market. And here's why I'm going to forecast this, and I'll give you a list of my little forecasts at the very end. Interest rates will stay higher for longer, and I've been saying this for over a year. They'll stay higher for longer than what you believe now. At whatever point you saw me speak in the last year, and I do a bunch of these, I said the same thing. It'll stay higher for longer. There's two reasons. Two reasons exactly. One of them is the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Any CPAs in here? I always like to ask this before I talk about balance sheets to make sure there's no CPAs. It's historical that people don't let their CPAs go to meetings. It must be, because it's very rare that I have some in the audience, although I did at one of the 2 speeches I gave last Thursday up in Atlanta. What happens when you're trying to goose the economy, you're coming out of recession? The Fed wants to pump money into the economy. And this is loosely. I would never say this in front of my grad students because it's very easy to understand, but it's not totally true. So I'm going to give you that version of the story. When the Federal Reserve wants to goose the economy, what they do is they call up the Treasury and say, hey, print us a few truckloads of money and make them big bills because we're going to buy a lot of bonds with it. And so they take that money, they buy bonds, government treasuries, they bought mortgage-backed securities after the recession, those kind of things. They even were allowed to buy corporate bonds there for a little while. So what that does is they buy bonds, that puts money into the economy. When you buy a bond, the price goes up, interest rates go down, right? If you hadn't had your finance class for a while, remember that much. So they're buying bonds. What happens to those bonds? They end up on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. That's why I ask about CPAs, being in the room, to make sure that they're cool with that, even though they know it's a rash simplification. Now remember the Great Recession, 08, 09, people lost their houses, people lost their cars, people lost their jobs. I was in Florida during that time. Everybody of a certain age remembers that. The Federal Reserve had about $1 trillion on the books before the Great Recession, and oh my God, they went to $2 trillion. They put another $1 trillion in the economy, and so the Fed ended up with $2 trillion on their balance sheet. That's a lot of money, right? Guess what it is now? $7.9 trillion, down from $8.9 trillion. You see the Great Recession there, that big wide gray bar. You went from 1 to 2 basically, but look at what happened since COVID. All right, here's what's going to happen. When those things roll off, they don't renew those bonds. That's kind of like they're selling bonds. Sell bonds, price go down. What happens to interest rate? They go up. So as they roll this off, and remember, you've heard the term quantitative easing. This is some major league easing right here. They're putting money into the economy by buying securities. Quantitative tightening is when it starts going down. Anybody want to guess what that little blip is right there? Silicon Valley Bank. 2 banks failed, big banks failed. And it's like, oh, stick a little more money in the economy to keep this thing going. So the Federal Reserve doesn't have to raise short-term interest rates. Rolling these bonds off raises interest rates or keeps them higher than you would expect. So that's the reason I say higher and longer. That's one of the two. The other two are, anybody remember the name of the Federal Reserve chairman before Paul Volcker came in? And you got to be my age or so before you even know who Paul Volcker is. This is in the 70s when inflation got way out of control. Nobody remembers his name. No. Actually, I'll think of the guy's name in a minute. It was Burns, but somebody corrected me at one of these and said there was a person that came in for like 3 months between Burns and Volcker. And it's kind of like when your football team is failing and you had you have a legendary coach, a Bobby Bowden kind of coach or something like that. You bring in somebody for a year or two knowing they're not going to make it because they'll never live up. It's kind of the temporary guy, in between two legends. It's kind of that story. But what happened was Arthur Burns was in office when inflation started getting out of control. They raised interest rates, and then people started squealing, oh, we're losing our jobs, blah, blah, blah. So they let off the gas and dropped interest rates. Inflation came back even higher, and they did it again, and it came back even higher. So when you saw those 16, 18, 20%, 30-year mortgages, that's when Chairman Volcker came in there and raised interest rates like crazy to kill inflation. So my other reason that interest rates will stay higher for longer is if I'm Jay Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, I'm going to say, listen, you don't get remembered unless you kill inflation when you have the opportunity to do it. So big interest rate decreases in the near future, no, I don't believe it. Could happen. The market certainly on the long end can make that kind of thing happen. But as far as the Federal Reserve going back to where, you end up with a situation where you can get a 3.75% 30-year mortgage, forget it. Forget it. It's not going to happen. Good news is this time compared to 08 is you're not going to see the mass, foreclosures and, car repossessions, all that stuff, although there are some of those happening out there on the short end. All right, let me tell you my forecast. This is the last slide I'm going to show you. We're almost done with Fed rate hikes. I'm not saying we're done, but remember, there's other things out there that'll keep rates higher, but the Fed, they're probably done. We don't know. There's going to be a lot more financial market volatility. Trust me, it's happening. This transition into where we're in a recession, we don't know, we're doing well, we're not sure, blah, blah, blah. That always portends some volatility out there. Here's my take on a recession. I think the probability is a little higher that the U.S. will go into a recession than will have an actual soft landing. That's my take. Some of the reasons I've already given you. It's hard to get it exactly right. It's an almost impossible task for the Federal Reserve to engineer a soft landing. And the last one is, Florida's going to hurt less than the U.S. If we do go into a recession at the national level, Florida may not participate. That's certainly possible here if we have a very light recession at the U.S. level. So there's my forecast for 2024. I appreciate you guys listening to me. I know there's time for a couple of questions here, and I want to get to that. Thank you very much.
Dr. Parrish?
Yes, sir.
I thank you. You're spot on a lot of things there, and it seems like the Fed has done a good job of being late to the party, reacting really hard because they're late to the party, and their strategy for controlling inflation was to tank the economy. Now and this is perception.
Yeah.
Now we're getting to the end of this, inflation's starting to get under control. They're taking the right actions by easing off the gas, and the markets react accordingly, and then 2 days later they release their comments which go in a completely different direction. That lack of consistency with what they're saying and what they're doing is messing with markets just as much as the markets themselves. I just wanted you to comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point. They want to come to consensus when they put out their statements. But there is a lot of people on both sides of this thing, no doubt, from reading the notes that they do put out. So, there's less consensus, but they still come to a consensus. There's a wider band of views out there, and these guys are not ashamed of sitting up there and saying what they think. That's the cool thing about the Fed and getting to see the notes. We don't get the notes until much later, after the meeting. And so we really don't know, but they do, the Fed's the best in the world about signaling, their intentions. They'll tell us what they're going to do in advance as much as they can. They try to calm the markets. They're probably late to the party. That's probably a good reason. But, you got to give them credit. They have really, tiptoed on this thing to keep us from going into a recession, and inflation is coming down. It's not down to the 2%, so I'm giving them credit. Yeah, they're probably a little late, but I think they've done a pretty good job given the facts of what has been going out there in the economy. But I'm glad you're reading the notes. Not many people do. Thanks.
Jerry, we have a question back here.
Okay.
Coming out of the pandemic, how has the U.S. fared or compared to other countries?
That's a great question. How's the U.S. doing compared to other countries? U.S. consumers are spending money keeping this thing afloat. You've heard the term revenge travel. You've heard the term, hey, I'm buying a motorhome because, blah, blah, blah. I always look at it this way. I used to be in the motorcycle business. I worked for 3 companies. I've given demo rides down here in front of the Speedway. I work for Triumph, Ducati, and KTM, all 3. When people are buying motorhomes and motorcycles, things are good, right? That's not a necessity. Trust me, it is not. We found that out in the 2008 recession that European motorcycle is not a necessity. So I would say the U.S. consumer has kept this thing rolling. Of course, now they've got $1 point something trillion in credit card debt and all that stuff. Can we sustain that? Other countries haven't seen such a run out of the gate in a lot of cases, and I don't know what the worldwide growth numbers are, to be honest with you. I haven't looked at that, but my guess would be the U.S. has probably outrun almost everyone as far as growth, but remember, a lot of that is consumer spending growth. Good question.
Another question, what can we do as a community to prevent our residents from losing their jobs if we go into a recession?
Well, that's a great question. One is to buy the products that are made locally. That's always a good thing. And some of that, of course, is recruiting the right companies to come in here. I know you guys do a really good job of that. You can't prevent everything from happening. So what you do, just like your investment portfolio, you spread the love around, and all, don't turn down anybody that wants to move here. You may not help them with some incentive or do anything like that, but business growth is good, and business growth people watch from other places. I'm going through this thing at the Georgia legislature now. They're talking about their incentives and what they should do, and my advice to them, without doubt, is don't do anything crazy. Because everybody is watching. They're watching Volusia County. They're watching the state of Florida. And we've been through all that stuff where we're not doing the emphasis on economic development in Florida that they're doing in basically every other single state in the country. So recruiting the right companies, supporting the local companies, certainly that's 2 things that you can do here.
I want to thank you so much for being here. I found this to be very informational, educational. And I've got kind of a 2-part question, and one is about inflation and really the long-term effects on currency when inflation is greater than GDP, just how that impacts it, because obviously inflation, economists get really nervous about inflation. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, and also the impact of the U.S. credit rating. I know we heard over the summer that we were downgraded, and I haven't heard a whole lot since then, but that kind of made some people concerned. I was wondering if you could touch on those two topics, please.
Okay, let's start with the credit downgrade first. Now, it's just like you and your credit score. You go to the bank, you got a high credit score, you get a lower interest rate. The U.S., by having, their credit rating dropped, I think it was Fitch that initially ended up with this, they're concerned about our long-term financing because we're going through, and I guess they'll sign the bill today to keep the government open, this brinksmanship of keeping the government open is crazy, and that's where part of this increased volatility is going to come from. It's just insane to run a country that way. You would never run your company that way. I will guarantee you that. Inflation is another thing. A little inflation is good because deflation is so bad. I mean, we haven't gone through that, like Japan and other countries have. So you want a little bit of inflation. That's why the Fed has a target of 2%. What your concern always is when a government gets in this much debt, federal government, any entity that can print its own money, historically what they do is they print money. That means those dollars or whatever currency you're talking about are worth less. Then the value of your currency goes down, your imports cost more. It can help on the export side because it'll help those folks exporting to other countries. But the issue is what will they do with this debt? Will they inflate it away like a lot of countries have done in the past? Nobody knows. But that has long-term implications. It would tend, if you're going to bet and you see that much debt in a country and no real responsible people taking over to pay it down, then you have to assume that your currency is going to be inflated in the future. Therefore, you're less likely to invest in it, no doubt. But it is good for exports, so there's always the good side of that. So it may bring more of this reshoring back to the country. We've seen a lot of that happening here and a pretty good bit in Florida as well. So nothing's good and bad in economics, but I think those are the answers. That's what I'm looking at as far as inflation.
Has the credit rating ever been downgraded before?
When we went into when we shut down the government, anytime those kind of credit events cause things to go down. Fortunately, the state of Florida has I'm sure AAA bond rating now. We can borrow money as cheap as anybody in the country here at the state of Florida. But as you can see, we're even paying off our debt. That I believe will continue. With you guys spending all that money you've been spending. And all those tax collections come up, all the states in the southeast, I think, are probably running surpluses, and Florida's certainly been in that same spot. Thanks
Two
for the
more
question.
questions back here. Will surging insurance property rates, property insurance, have an outsized negative impact on Florida economy?
That's a great question. As a homeowner in the state of Florida for I don't know how many years, that's an issue. When I was at the Florida Chamber, that was one of the number one issues, tort reform to try to keep the lawsuits down in the insurance situation. Oh my God, these, some of the things that were going on out there, these law firms that were, the roofing lawsuits and all that stuff was just crazy, driving up insurance rates. Citizens was affected, every insurance company, some of them left, my company that I have homeowners insurance with that I had to really scratch around and find has decided to leave the state of Florida. Now there's been some tort reform going on here. Certainly that will help in the long run, you think. People will see there's an opportunity down here, but the short run of a year or two, it's going to be even more difficult. But, anytime, one of your biggest expenses is lawsuit expenses instead of just damage expenses, then that's a concern. And that's a concern to these companies, these multi-million-dollar judgments. You got to understand that Florida should have higher homeowners insurance rates than many states. We're in a riskier spot, man. Just face it. That's part of life. So we should pay more. Should we pay double or triple? I don't know about that. And I will tell you the most important thing when people are out there competing against jobs. Let's say Florida and 2 other states are trying to attract a company to move down to the southeast. Guess what number one issue is that the other states are going to bring up? Hey, you better check your property insurance before you go down there. That's probably a bigger deal in the long run than charging all you guys more money than they probably should. So it is a big deal, and there's people, I see articles in the Wall Street Journal, people are leaving Florida because their homeowners insurance is too high. So I think the perception is just as important as what's actually going on out here, but people are using that against the state of Florida in recruiting companies, I will guarantee you, every single time.
To those who deferred their retirement investment, continued working, and kept it on the market, what's their outlook for their return for the next 10 years?
Oh, that's a great outlook for returns in the markets. I love this question. Let me remind you that Warren Buffett has weighed in on this. Here's what Warren Buffett says. Don't believe an economist unless he's rich. He makes fun of economists for being very, very poor predictors. Now, we know people, deferred their retirement. That's a good thing if you're healthy and, then your Social Security check goes up for every more year you work. So it's probably not been a bad thing. But what a lot of people did it for was because of inflation. They had their retirement kind of set, and then they had this, 10 and 20% inflation, and a lot of things happened. And so they decided to continue to work. I have no idea what will happen to your returns. Let me be blunt with you. Nobody does. If they tell you they do, they're lying. All they'll do is they'll look at these long-term averages. Well, the long-term averages in the S&P is 7.1%. You'll get those kind of answers. I have no idea. Diversify your portfolio. Get some of a little, different things is all I can advise you to do, because nobody knows what's going to happen to those investments. And if they're telling you they do, they're just lying to you. So I don't know. I'm working, I'm 62 years old now. I'll be 63 here shortly. I'm going to work till I'm 70 because I like to work. And I figure by age 70, everybody will be tired of hearing me outspeak on the road. And it'll be time for me to go up to the farm in Alabama or go back to the lake in Tallahassee and just not do anything. So I don't know, but that's a great question. Talk to your financial advisor, and if you believe them, if they tell you they know, maybe they do. All right, thank you all very much.
Once again, one more round of applause for Dr. Parrish. I once again want to thank our sponsor, Jason Meyer and Synergy Billing. If anyone is interested in sponsoring the future Q Breakfast, please see someone from the Economic Development staff. Got Katrina in the back and Riccardi, or come see me and we'll get you situated. We want you to mark your calendars for February 16th. That will be our next Q, and our guest speaker will be from Florida Commerce. So thank you for joining us once again, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday.